My name is Audrey Morrison, and I am 31 years old. I stared at my husband Brandon's phone in disbelief. The text messages to someone named Tiffany detailed their upcoming surprise vacation to Bali, using our joint savings account. $78,000. Gone. My hands trembled as I placed his phone down exactly where I found it. Little did Brandon know, his trophy wife wasn't just a pretty face. For 3 years, I've been the secret trustee of his $26 million family fortune. Now it was time he learned who really held the power. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to teach someone a painful but necessary lesson about respect. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how a so-called naive trophy wife orchestrated the financial awakening of a lifetime. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Far from it. My childhood in small-town Nebraska was defined by hard work and modest means. My father worked at the local factory while my mother juggled part-time jobs to keep our family afloat. From age 14, I babysat, mowed lawns, and eventually worked evenings at the local diner to save for college. Unlike Brandon, I understood the value of every dollar because I'd earned each one. When I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University, I still needed to work 3 part-time jobs to cover the remaining tuition and living expenses. I'd stock grocery shelves at dawn, attend classes during the day, then wait tables at night. Weekends meant tutoring other students. Sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself. But I graduated with a business degree and only manageable student debt, which I considered a victory. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a boutique financial advisory firm in Chicago. My analytical mind and work ethic quickly earned me promotions. By 27, I was managing portfolios for clients with moderate wealth. Not millions, but enough that I needed to understand complex financial instruments, tax strategies, and estate planning. Little did I know how valuable this knowledge would become in my personal life. I met Brandon Morrison at a charity gala benefiting children's education. I was there representing my firm, which had donated a modest sum. Brandon was a fixture in Chicago's social scene, known for his family name and generous donations that made the society pages. He was handsome in that polished way of someone who has never worried about money a day in his life. Perfect teeth, designer suit, a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "You don't look like you're enjoying the free champagne," he said, approaching me as I stood awkwardly by a column, observing the wealthy mingling around us. "I'm working," I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor. He laughed. "So am I, technically. Family obligation. 5th generation of Morrisons writing checks to prove we care." At least he was self-aware about his privilege. That surprised me. Brandon was 30, devastatingly charming and persistent. After our first conversation, he found my business card and called my office 3 times before I agreed to dinner. I was hesitant. Men born into that level of wealth typically dated within their circles. But there was something refreshing about his honesty regarding his privileged life. Our first date was at a restaurant so exclusive I hadn't known it existed. He ordered without looking at prices, selected wine that cost more than my monthly rent, and spoke about his life managing family investments. When I asked what that entailed, his answers revealed he did very little actual work. The family's money managers handled everything while he attended meetings and played golf with business connections. "Enough about me," he said eventually. "Tell me about growing up in Nebraska," I reminded him, noticing he'd already forgotten. "Right, Nebraska. That must have been." He searched for an appropriate word, authentic. I couldn't help but laugh at his diplomatic attempt to discuss middle-class America. But instead of being offended, I decided to educate him. I told him about working through school, about understanding compound interest not as an investment strategy, but as a threat when you're paying off student loans. About calculating whether to fix your car or take the bus based on which would leave enough for groceries that month. To my surprise, Brandon was fascinated. "I've never met anyone like you," he said. "Most women I date just want to talk about their latest shopping trip or which celebrity they saw at brunch." Our relationship progressed quickly. Brandon pursued me with the determination of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. He sent flowers to my office, planned elaborate dates, and slowly dismantled my reservations about our different backgrounds. When he introduced me to his family 3 months later, their disapproval was immediate and unmistakable. His mother Elizabeth assessed me with a cool gaze that took in my department store dress and modest jewelry. His father Harrison barely looked up from his phone. His sister Natalie openly asked what firm I worked for, then said, "I've never heard of it," with a dismissive laugh. Only Brandon's grandfather Stanley showed any warmth. While the rest of the family mingled at their summer estate, Stanley invited me to see his library. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my education, my views on financial markets. When I mentioned a recent change in estate tax laws, his eyebrows raised. "You understand estate planning?" he asked. "It's part of my job," I explained. "Many of our clients are preparing for generational wealth transfers." Stanley nodded slowly, studying me with newfound interest. "And what would you advise for someone looking to ensure their wealth isn't squandered by the next generation?" We spent 2 hours discussing trusts, financial responsibility, and the challenges of preserving wealth across generations. I had no idea this conversation would later change my life. Despite his family's obvious disdain, Brandon proposed 6 months after we met. The ring was extravagant, the proposal planned with military precision on a private yacht on Lake Michigan. I said yes because despite our differences, I truly loved him. His charm, his apparent devotion, the way he seemed to value my perspective, all made me believe we could build a life together that bridged our different worlds. Our wedding was an elaborate affair at the Morrison family estate. 300 guests, many of whom I'd never met. A dress that cost more than my car. Society photographers documenting every moment. Through it all, I felt like an imposter in a world I didn't belong in. But Brandon held my hand tightly, proudly introducing me as the smartest woman in Chicago to business associates and family friends. After the ceremony, Stanley pulled me aside. "You're exactly what this family needs," he said quietly. "Someone who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not a right." I smiled and thanked him, not realizing the significance of his words or that he was already making arrangements to put his trust in me in ways I couldn't imagine. The first year of marriage felt like living in a beautiful dream. We moved into a stunning lakefront penthouse with views that still took my breath away each morning. Brandon insisted I cut back my hours at work, saying we should travel and enjoy life together. I compromised by switching to part-time consulting, unwilling to completely surrender the independence I'd worked so hard to achieve. "You don't need to work, Audrey," Brandon would say, looking genuinely perplexed when I'd open my laptop to review client portfolios. "That's the whole point of having money." "I don't work because I need to," I tried explaining. "I work because it's part of who I am." He'd shake his head but drop the subject, another small disconnect in our otherwise harmonious life. We traveled to Europe, the Caribbean, and Asia. We attended galas and charity events. We hosted dinner parties for Brandon's business associates. From the outside, we appeared to be the perfect couple. Around our first anniversary, small changes began to appear in our relationship. Brandon started coming home later, claiming long meetings or drinks with clients. His once constant text messages throughout the day became sporadic. He'd disappear for hours on weekends to the golf club or to meet friends I'd never been introduced to. I tried not to be suspicious. After all, Brandon had never given me concrete reasons to doubt him. But my analytical mind couldn't help noticing patterns. When reviewing our credit card statements, a habit from my budgeting days I couldn't break, I noticed charges at jewelry stores for items I'd never received, dinner tabs at restaurants we hadn't visited together, hotel bar charges on nights he claimed to be working late. When I casually mentioned a charge at Tiffany & Company, Brandon quickly explained it was a birthday gift for his sister Natalie. It seemed plausible, but something in his too quick response felt rehearsed. Still, I pushed my doubts aside. I'd chosen to trust Brandon when I married him. Then came the unexpected passing of Stanley Morrison. At 92, his health had been declining for months, but his death still hit the family hard. Brandon seemed particularly affected, though not in the way I expected. Rather than grief, he displayed impatience and anxiety, constantly checking in with the family lawyers about the arrangements and the transfers. The day before the funeral, I received a call from Stanley's personal attorney, Harold Wilson. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to speak with you privately regarding your late grandfather-in-law's wishes," he said, his tone grave and formal. We arranged to meet at his downtown office that afternoon. I told Brandon I needed to pick up something for the funeral, a small lie that made me uncomfortable but seemed necessary given Harold's emphasis on privacy. The law office was old-world elegant, with dark wood paneling and leather chairs that had witnessed decades of wealth-changing hands. Harold, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and carefully combed silver hair, closed his office door firmly before speaking. "Mrs. Morrison, what I'm about to tell you was arranged by Stanley over 2 years ago, shortly after your wedding to Brandon," he began. "Stanley made a significant change to the Morrison Family Trust. As you may know, Brandon receives quarterly distributions from this trust, which comprises the majority of his income." I nodded. Brandon had explained that his work managing family investments was largely ceremonial. His real income came from the trust established by his great-grandfather and managed through generations. "Stanley amended the trust to name you, not Brandon, as the primary trustee," Harold continued, watching my reaction carefully. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I don't understand," I said. "Why would he do that?" "Stanley had concerns about Brandon's financial judgment," Harold explained, opening a folder. "He believed you possessed the financial acumen and moral character necessary to ensure the trust's preservation. As trustee, you have significant discretionary power over distributions beyond the mandatory quarterly payments." He slid a document across the desk. "This letter from Stanley explains his reasoning. He asked that it be given to you privately upon his death." With shaking hands, I opened the letter. "Dear Audrey," it began in a shaky handwriting. "If you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. I've watched you and Brandon these past years. You see him for who he is, charming, generous, but lacking the responsibility that should accompany privilege. During our conversations about finance, I recognized in you what the Morrison wealth needs, a steward, not a spender. Brandon doesn't know about this arrangement and legally doesn't need to be informed. The choice of when or if to tell him is yours. Trust your judgment as I have. With respect and confidence, Stanley Morrison." I looked up at Harold, my mind racing. This can't be legal. Brandon is his grandson. I assure you, it's completely legal. Stanley was of sound mind and had every right to appoint the trustee of his choosing. The trust still benefits Brandon and eventually your children, but you control how and when distributions beyond the mandatory minimums are made. I left Harold's office feeling as though I was carrying a time bomb. The responsibility was enormous, but even more overwhelming was the secret itself. I was now controlling my husband's financial future without his knowledge. At the funeral the next day, I watched Brandon through new eyes. While the family mourned, he checked his phone repeatedly, stepping out twice to take calls. When the reading of the will was announced for the following week, a flash of eagerness crossed his face that made my stomach turn. He wasn't mourning his grandfather, he was anticipating his inheritance. That night, as Brandon slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling wondering what Stanley had seen in our marriage that I had missed, and whether his faith in me was about to be tested in ways none of us had anticipated. The months following Stanley's funeral brought more distance between Brandon and me. He began traveling for business opportunities that remained vaguely defined whenever I asked for details. Weeknight dinners together became rare. When he was home, he was constantly on his phone, turning the screen away whenever I walked near. I tried addressing it directly one evening when he canceled our dinner plans at the last minute. "Brandon, I feel like we're drifting apart," I said, trying to keep accusation from my voice. "We barely see each other anymore." He looked up from his phone with an expression of practiced concern. "It's just been crazy since Grandpa died. Dad's putting more responsibility on me with the family holdings." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "It'll settle down soon. Promise." But it didn't settle down. If anything, his absences increased. One night, he came home smelling of an unfamiliar perfume, something floral and much younger than anything I wore. When I pointed it out, his explanation came too quickly. My assistant got a new perfume. Probably rubbed off when she handed me some documents. At 10 p.m.? I asked. His eyes flashed with irritation. Jesus, Audrey. Are you seriously going to be paranoid now? I was working late, and yes, my assistant was there too. That's her job. The dismissiveness in his tone hurt more than the obvious lie. I retreated, but my suspicions were fully awakened. The next day, I did something I'd never imagined doing. While Brandon showered, I checked his phone. The passcode was my birthday, at least he hadn't changed that, but what I found inside shattered any remaining illusions about our marriage. Text messages to someone saved as T contained explicit conversations, plans for meetups, and complaints about having to maintain appearances with the wife. One message from the previous night read, "Miss you already. Can't wait till Friday. 3 whole days away from everything." Her response: "Rooms already booked at our place. Pack light. You won't need many clothes, winking face." My hands trembled as I replaced his phone exactly as I'd found it. When he left for work, I sat at our kitchen island, trying to process the betrayal. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and demand answers. But another part, the analytical financial advisor who evaluated options before acting, held me back. Instead, I began gathering information. I reviewed our credit card statements more carefully, finding regular charges at a boutique hotel downtown, the Langham. Always on Tuesdays and occasional weekends. I checked phone records, finding a number that Brandon called multiple times daily, often late at night. 2 weeks after discovering the texts, I made a decision. Brandon had mentioned a late meeting that Tuesday. Instead of waiting at home, I dressed carefully in a nondescript outfit, drove downtown, and parked near the Langham. My heart pounded as I entered the elegant lobby, feeling like an intruder in a world where my husband had created a separate life. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:30, Brandon walked through the main entrance, but not in his business suit. He changed into casual clothes I recognized from our closet. He walked confidently to the elevator bank without checking in, clearly a regular guest. 10 minutes later, a young woman entered. Tall, blonde, wearing an expensive-looking red dress that displayed the kind of confident sexuality that made me feel instantly dowdy and invisible. When she checked in at the front desk, I moved close enough to hear her give the name, Tiffany Clark. The desk attendant smiled with recognition. "Mr. Morrison is already upstairs, Miss Clark. Enjoy your evening." I watched her walk to the same elevator bank, the confirmation of my fears like a physical blow. Still, I needed to be certain. I waited 30 minutes, then went to the hotel restaurant, requesting a table with a view of the dining room. At 9 p.m., Brandon and Tiffany emerged from the elevator and were seated at what was clearly their regular table. The maitre d' greeted them by name, and a bottle of champagne appeared without being ordered. I watched them through dinner, my food untouched before me. They laughed, leaned close to each other, and held hands across the table. Brandon looked happier and more relaxed than he'd been at home in months. When he leaned across to kiss her, I quickly took a photo with my phone, then another as his hand caressed her face in a gesture of genuine affection. The evidence was undeniable, but it was the intimacy between them that truly devastated me. This wasn't just sex. Brandon was having a relationship, investing emotionally in another woman while our marriage withered from neglect. I left before they could spot me, driving home through tears that blurred the streetlights into streaks of color. In our bedroom, I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. Then I showered, applied concealer to hide the evidence of my breakdown, and got into bed. When Brandon returned at midnight, I pretended to be asleep. He didn't attempt to wake me or touch me. He simply went to the guest bathroom, showered, and climbed into his side of the bed, maintaining the careful distance that had become our normal. Lying there in the dark, listening to the steady breathing of the man who had just left his lover to sleep beside his wife, I made a decision. I would not confront him yet. Despite the devastating evidence, some naive part of me still hoped we could repair what was broken. I would give him one chance to end the affair and recommit to our marriage. One chance to be the man I thought I had married. Over the next few weeks, I maintained the facade of normalcy while watching Brandon's behavior more carefully. Each late meeting and business trip now had clear meaning. I could track his affair through credit card charges and mysterious absences with painful accuracy. Still, I held on to hope that our marriage could be salvaged if he ended the affair. Then came the financial betrayal that changed everything. One evening, Brandon came home with unusual attentiveness. He brought flowers, ordered dinner from my favorite restaurant, and opened an expensive bottle of wine. After dinner, he casually placed some documents on the coffee table. "Just some paperwork that needs your signature, babe," he said, sliding them toward me with a pen. "For a new investment opportunity." I'd learned to be wary of Brandon's investment opportunities, which typically involved friends' startups or trendy ventures that rarely materialized into actual returns. But this seemed different. "What am I signing exactly?" I asked, already flipping through the papers with the practiced eye of a financial advisor. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "It's just some refinancing on the condo. Interest rates are down, so we can get a better deal." As I read the documents, my blood ran cold. This wasn't refinancing. It was a second mortgage on our home for $450,000. The investment opportunity was never mentioned in the paperwork. "Brandon, this is a second mortgage," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What's it for?" He tried to maintain his casual demeanor. "Like I said, an investment opportunity. It's complicated to explain, but it's going to have huge returns. Just trust me on this." "I need more details before signing something this significant," I insisted. "What exactly are you investing in?" His charming facade cracked slightly. "Does it matter? It's not like you understand high-level investments anyway." "I'm a financial advisor," I reminded him. "It's literally my job to understand investments." His expression hardened. "Your job is reviewing retirement accounts for middle-class nobodies. This is different. This is real money." The contempt in his voice stunned me. I placed the papers back on the table. "I'm not signing this." Brandon's face flushed with anger. "You know what your problem is, Audrey? You've forgotten your place in all this. You'd be nothing without me. Who do you think pays for all this?" He gestured around our luxury condo. "Your little part-time job? Don't make me laugh." The words hit like physical blows. In that moment, I saw clearly how Brandon viewed me, not as a partner, but as a possession, a decorative accessory to his wealthy lifestyle who should be grateful and compliant. "My place?" I repeated, my voice quiet but steady. "And what exactly is my place in your life, Brandon?" He must have realized he'd gone too far because his expression quickly shifted to contrition. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just stressed about this deal." He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Let's talk about it tomorrow when we're both calmer." After he went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, his words echoing in my mind. "You'd be nothing without me." The Brandon I thought I'd married would never have said such a thing. But perhaps that Brandon had never existed at all. The next day, I began a thorough investigation of our finances. As a trustee of the Morrison Family Trust, I had access to information Brandon didn't realize I possessed. What I discovered sent shockwaves through my already fragile trust. Brandon had accumulated significant gambling debts at several casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City, over $200,000 in the past year alone. He had opened 3 credit cards I didn't know about, all nearly maxed out. Most disturbing were the purchases: a $15,000 diamond bracelet from Tiffany & Company, a $22,000 Hermes bag, a down payment on a leased Mercedes. All gifts for Tiffany that he had hidden from our family finances. But the most devastating discovery came when I checked our joint savings account, the one we had both contributed to throughout our marriage, earmarked for our future. The account that had contained $78,000 the last time I had checked. Balance: $240.57. With shaking hands, I called our bank and requested the recent transaction history. A single withdrawal of $77,500 had been made 3 days earlier. When I asked for details, the bank representative confirmed Brandon had made the withdrawal in person, converting most of it to cashier's checks. That night, I searched Brandon's email while he slept. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: confirmation of a 2-week vacation package to Bali. Private villa. Luxury resort. First-class airfare. The works. For 2 people. Departure date, June 15th. Our wedding anniversary. I also found emails between Brandon and Tiffany discussing their future plans. Once this Bali trip is behind us, I'll start the divorce process, he had written. She'll get the standard package in the prenup, enough to keep her comfortable but nothing significant. Tiffany's response chilled me. Can't wait to stop being the secret girlfriend. Your wife seems nice enough, but it's time she found someone at her own level. Brandon's reply, Audrey served her purpose. Once Grandpa's money fully transfers and I have control of everything, we can start fresh. Trophy wives are replaceable. What we have is real. I sat in our home office, staring at these messages until sunrise, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but now they were joined by something else. Cold, clear anger. Brandon had not only betrayed our marriage with his affair, but had depleted our joint savings, money I had helped accumulate, to finance a luxury vacation with his girlfriend on our anniversary. The final insult was the casual way he discussed discarding me once he had control of everything. Little did he know that control had already been transferred, not to him, but to me. Stanley had seen something in Brandon that I had been blind to, and now I understood why he had made the unusual decision to make me trustee. As I watched the sunrise over Lake Michigan from our penthouse window, I made a decision. Brandon Morrison was about to learn that his trophy wife wasn't nearly as decorative or disposable as he believed. The realization that Brandon saw me as nothing more than a temporary accessory, a stepping stone to be discarded once he secured his inheritance, transformed my pain into purpose. For days, I moved through our home like a ghost, mechanically maintaining the appearance of normalcy while my mind worked through possibilities. As trustee of the Morrison Family Trust, I had significant powers that Brandon knew nothing about. But wielding that power would mean permanently altering our relationship and potentially his future. It wasn't a responsibility I took lightly, even after discovering his betrayal. 1 week after finding the Bali reservation, I made an appointment with Harold Wilson, the trust attorney. His downtown office felt like a sanctuary of order and reason compared to the emotional chaos of my home life. Mrs. Morrison, Harold greeted me formally. How can I assist you today? I need to understand exactly what powers I have as trustee, I said, getting straight to the point. And what restrictions exist on Brandon's access to the trust assets? Harold nodded, unsurprised by the question. Stanley anticipated you might need this information eventually. He opened a folder containing the trust documents. As trustee, you have significant discretionary power. Brandon is entitled to quarterly distributions of income from the trust, approximately $175,000 per quarter. You cannot legally withhold these payments without due cause. What qualifies as due cause? I asked. The trust contains a moral turpitude clause, Harold explained. If the beneficiary engages in behavior that would bring dishonor to the Morrison name, criminal activity, public scandal, severe addiction issues, the trustee can temporarily suspend distributions pending review by the trust committee. And beyond the quarterly distributions? Any additional distributions require trustee approval, meaning your approval. This includes access to the principal, investments made with trust assets, or using trust assets as collateral for loans. I took a deep breath. The house we live in, is that a trust asset or Brandon's personal property? The penthouse is owned by the trust, Harold confirmed. Brandon has right of residence as a beneficiary, but he does not own it outright. What about our cars? The vacation property in Lake Geneva? The boat? Harold checked his records. All trust assets. Brandon's personal property is limited to his clothing, personal effects, and any accounts solely in his name. The scope of Brandon's deception became clearer. He had presented himself as independently wealthy, but in reality, he owned almost nothing outright. The luxury lifestyle he had used to impress me, and now Tiffany, was entirely dependent on the trust his grandfather had placed under my control. Harold, this is difficult to ask, but I need to know. If Brandon and I divorce, What happens to my position as trustee? Harold's expression remained neutral. Stanley anticipated this question as well. Your position as trustee is independent of your marital status. It would require a court order or unanimous vote of the trust committee to remove you. The weight of this information settled over me. Stanley had given me extraordinary power, not just over the trust, but over Brandon's entire way of life. One more question, I said. Has Brandon attempted to access additional trust funds recently? Beyond his quarterly distributions? Harold hesitated, then nodded. He requested an advance on his next 2 quarterly distributions, citing investment opportunities. As this requires trustee approval, I informed him the request would need to be reviewed. I was planning to contact you about it. When did he make this request? 3 days ago. The timing aligned perfectly with the Bali reservation and the emptied savings account. Brandon had taken our joint savings, but it wasn't enough for whatever he had planned. He needed more money that, unbeknownst to him, required my approval. I left Harold's office with clarity about my options, but still uncertain about my next steps. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. It contained only a photo, Brandon and Tiffany entering a jewelry store, his arm around her waist. A second text followed. Thought you should know. He's buying her an engagement ring. She's been showing off the text messages about your divorce. The sender identified herself as Rachel, a friend of Tiffany's who felt I deserved to know the truth. According to Rachel, Tiffany had been bragging about upgrading to wife status as soon as Brandon finalized our divorce and secured his inheritance. That night, I made 2 important calls. The first was to Patricia Keller, reputed to be the most formidable divorce attorney in Chicago. The second was to a forensic accountant recommended by my firm, who specialized in tracking hidden assets and financial misconduct. Over the next week, I gathered evidence methodically. The forensic accountant documented every misappropriated dollar from our joint accounts, every hidden credit card, every gift to Tiffany. Patricia Keller advised me on securing copies of all relevant financial records before Brandon could attempt to hide or alter them. I also consulted with the trust's legal team about invoking the moral turpitude clause. While adultery alone might not qualify, Brandon's misappropriation of joint funds for his affair, combined with his gambling debts and attempts to mortgage trust property without disclosure, created a compelling case. As I built my case, Brandon grew increasingly distant, often not coming home until after midnight. When he did return, he was distracted and irritable, clearly counting the days until his planned escape to Bali. Once, he casually mentioned he might need my signature on some routine paperwork, but quickly dropped the subject when I asked for details. 2 weeks before their scheduled departure, I made my final preparations. I secured a modest, but comfortable apartment in a different neighborhood, paid 6 months in advance. I moved my personal documents, irreplaceable family mementos, and a reasonable portion of my clothing there without Brandon noticing. I transferred my personal funds, modest compared to the Morrison wealth but mine, to new accounts Brandon couldn't access. I also had a private conversation with Tiffany, meeting her at a coffee shop while Brandon was at his weekly golf game. Her shock at seeing me quickly turned to defensive hostility. "What do you want?" she demanded, clearly uncomfortable. "Just to give you some information before you leave for Bali," I said calmly, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of text messages between Brandon and 3 other women, all from the past month. Messages that made it clear Tiffany wasn't the only special woman in his life. I also included bank statements showing Brandon's gambling debts and a summary of his actual financial position without the trust assets. "He's not as wealthy as he's led you to believe," I explained as she flipped through the documents, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to hurt. "The houses, cars, boats, none of it belongs to him outright. He has access, not ownership." "Why are you showing me this?" Tiffany asked, her voice smaller now. "Because you should know who you're really involved with before you make any life-changing decisions," I replied. "Brandon has a pattern of making promises he can't keep and spending money he doesn't have." Tiffany left our meeting visibly shaken. I didn't know if she would confront Brandon or simply disappear from his life, but either way, their paradise getaway was about to become considerably more complicated. The final piece fell into place when I received confirmation from the trust committee. Based on the evidence I had provided, they had unanimously approved a temporary freeze on all discretionary distributions to Brandon beyond his minimum quarterly payments. Additionally, they had flagged any attempts to use trust assets as loan collateral. As the departure date for their Bali trip approached, I felt a strange calm replace the emotional turmoil of recent months. Brandon had taught me an expensive lesson about trust, but I was about to teach him an even more valuable one about consequences. The day before Brandon and Tiffany's scheduled departure to Bali, I took a personal day from work and set my plan in motion. I knew Brandon would be out until late afternoon, finalizing details for their trip and possibly purchasing last-minute gifts for Tiffany. This gave me the time I needed. First, I confirmed with Harold that all the legal preparations were in place. The trust committee had officially frozen Brandon's access to any discretionary funds. His credit lines backed by trust assets had been suspended. The only money available to him now was his regular quarterly distribution, which had already been partially spent on his gambling debts and whatever personal accounts he maintained. Next, I contacted our bank and credit card companies, removing myself as an authorized user on joint accounts. I didn't close the accounts. I simply ensured Brandon couldn't access any of my personal funds or incur additional debt in my name. I arranged for Patricia Keller to have divorce papers prepared, citing adultery and financial misconduct. The filing included detailed evidence of Brandon's affair and his misappropriation of joint assets to finance it. Patricia had assured me that while Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, the documentation of Brandon's behavior would be relevant when determining financial settlements. Throughout the day, I moved methodically through our penthouse, gathering the last of my essential belongings. I wasn't taking anything extravagant, just my personal items, clothing, and a few mementos that held sentimental rather than monetary value. Everything else, the designer furniture, the expensive art, the luxury appliances, belonged to the trust, not to either of us personally. As afternoon approached, I received an unexpected text from Tiffany. "I'm out. He can go to Bali alone. Thanks for the wake-up call." I didn't respond, but internally I felt a flicker of satisfaction. At least one part of Brandon's carefully constructed plan was already unraveling. At 4:30 p.m., I received an alert that Brandon had used his key card to enter the building. I took a deep breath and seated myself in the living room, divorce papers on the coffee table, evidence folders neatly arranged beside them. This confrontation was necessary, but I was under no illusions about how volatile it might become. When Brandon walked through the door, he was initially startled to see me sitting there. I rarely came home early from work. "Audrey," he said, quickly composing himself. "What are you doing home?" "We need to talk, Brandon," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Please sit down." He hesitated, clearly assessing whether he could avoid this conversation. Eventually, he dropped his keys on the entryway table and walked over, remaining standing rather than sitting across from me. "What's this about?" "I have plans tonight." "I know about your plans," I replied. "Both for tonight and for tomorrow. Your trip to Bali with Tiffany won't be happening." His face flushed, but he quickly attempted to regain control. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult my intelligence." I gestured to the folders. "I have copies of the reservation confirmation, your text messages, the receipts for all the gifts you've bought her. I have photographic evidence of your meetings at the Langham. I know everything, Brandon." For a moment, he seemed genuinely speechless. Then his expression hardened. "Fine. This conversation was coming anyway. Yes, I've been seeing someone else. Our marriage hasn't been working for a long time, Audrey. We want different things." "What we want isn't the issue," I said. "It's how you've chosen to handle it. You've been planning to divorce me for months while secretly emptying our joint accounts and using our savings to finance your affair. That money was mostly mine anyway," he snapped. "Let's not pretend your contribution was significant. Regardless of who contributed what, it was our joint savings," I continued, refusing to be baited into an emotional argument. "Money we both agreed was for our future. Instead, you took it to fund a luxury vacation with your girlfriend, scheduled for our anniversary, no less. Brandon's posture shifted subtly, becoming more defensive. Look, I know how this looks. But let's be practical about this. We can handle the divorce like adults. You'll be well taken care of, as per the prenup. You'll have enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. The prenup you insisted on to protect your family's assets, I noted. Exactly. It's very clear on the terms. I nodded slowly. It is. But there's something you should know, Brandon. Something your grandfather shared with me before he died. What are you talking about? His expression showed genuine confusion. 3 years ago, shortly after our wedding, Stanley amended the Morrison Family Trust. He was concerned about your financial judgment and wanted to ensure the family legacy would be protected. Brandon's confusion deepened. What does that have to do with you? Stanley named me as the trustee of the Morrison Family Trust, not you. I've been managing the trust assets for the past 3 years. Brandon stared at me in disbelief, then barked out a laugh. That's absurd. You expect me to believe my grandfather gave control of our family fortune to you? You've lost your mind, Audrey. I have the legal documentation right here, I said, sliding another folder toward him. Harold Wilson can confirm everything. As trustee, I control all discretionary distributions beyond your quarterly payments. I determine whether trust assets can be used as collateral for loans. I approve or deny any major expenditures from trust funds. Brandon snatched the folder and began flipping through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. When he reached Stanley's handwritten letter explaining his decision, Brandon's hands began to shake. This can't be legal, he muttered. It's completely legal, I assured him. Harold vetted everything thoroughly. Stanley was of sound mind when he made the amendment. Brandon slammed the folder down. So what? I still get my distributions. Nothing changes. That's not entirely accurate, I continued. Based on evidence of your gambling debts, your misappropriation of joint funds, and your attempts to secure loans against trust assets without disclosure, the Trust Committee has invoked the Moral Turpitude Clause. Your access to anything beyond the minimum quarterly distributions has been temporarily suspended. You can't do that, he said, his voice rising. That money is mine by right. My family's money. The trust was established to protect the Morrison legacy across generations, not to fund gambling debts or extramarital affairs, I replied, keeping my tone professional despite his growing anger. As trustee, I have a fiduciary responsibility to uphold the terms of the trust. Brandon began pacing, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. I'll fight this. I'll have you removed as trustee. You can certainly try, I acknowledged. But the amendment includes specific protections against that very scenario. It would require a court order or unanimous vote of the trust committee to remove me. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Brandon's face cycled through emotions, disbelief, rage, fear. The house, he said suddenly. This penthouse is mine. You'll have to leave. Actually, the penthouse is owned by the trust, I corrected him. You have right of residence as a beneficiary, but you don't own it outright. Nothing needs to change immediately regarding living arrangements, but given the circumstances, I've already secured alternative accommodations for myself. Brandon collapsed onto the sofa, the magnitude of his predicament becoming clear. My cars? The boat? The place in Lake Geneva? All trust assets, I confirmed. Your personal property is limited to your clothing, personal effects, and any accounts solely in your name. He stared at me with a mixture of shock and growing desperation. Audrey, we can work this out. I made a mistake with Tiffany. It didn't mean anything. It meant enough for you to plan a divorce while spending our savings on her, I noted. It meant enough to schedule a luxury vacation on our anniversary. That was stupid, I admit it, he said, his tone shifting to placating. But we have history together. We can get past this. These are divorce papers, I said, pointing to the documents on the coffee table. I'm not filing them today. That's your choice to make. If you want to attempt to repair our marriage, I would require complete financial transparency, couples therapy, and a postnuptial agreement drafted by my attorney. If you prefer to proceed with divorce, these papers outline fair terms based on our prenuptial agreement. Brandon's expression hardened again. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The power. This is revenge. This isn't about power or revenge, Brandon. It's about consequences. You made specific choices knowing they would hurt me. You planned to discard me once you believed you had secured your inheritance. You referred to me as replaceable. His eyes widened slightly at the last point, confirming he recognized his own words from the email to Tiffany. You had no right to read my private messages, he said, grasping for moral high ground. And you had no right to empty our joint savings for a vacation with your girlfriend, I countered. We've both made choices we'll have to live with. Brandon stood up abruptly. I need to think. I need to talk to my lawyer. That's your prerogative, I said. I'll be staying at my new place tonight to give you space. My contact information is in the folder if you want to discuss next steps. As I gathered my purse and the last overnight bag I had packed, Brandon called after me, his voice taking on a pleading quality I had never heard before. Audrey, wait. We can fix this. I made mistakes, but I still care about you. We had something good once. I paused at the door and turned to face him one last time. You were right about one thing, Brandon. I am a trophy wife, just not yours. I'm your grandfather's. He recognized something in me that you missed completely while you were busy being charmed by your own reflection. The look of stunned realization on Brandon's face as I closed the door behind me wasn't as satisfying as I might have imagined. There was no joy in breaking someone, even someone who had hurt me deeply. But there was a quiet dignity in standing up for myself, in refusing to be the disposable accessory he had tried to make me. As I drove to my new apartment, modest but comfortable, paid for with my own money, I felt something unexpected: freedom. Not from the marriage or even from Brandon, but from the illusion that I needed his approval or his family's wealth to be whole. Stanley had seen that in me from the beginning. It had just taken me longer to recognize it in myself. 6 months after confronting Brandon, I was living in a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. It wasn't the luxury penthouse with lake views, but it was mine, paid for with my own earnings from my now full-time position at a prestigious financial firm. One of the partners had recruited me after hearing about my work as trustee for the Morrison Trust, impressed by my ethical handling of a complex situation. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. Despite his initial threats to fight everything, Brandon ultimately accepted the terms of our prenuptial agreement. He received exactly what that agreement stipulated, no more, no less. The forensic accountant's documentation of his financial misconduct prevented any attempts to claim additional assets. Brandon had contested my position as trustee, of course. He hired expensive attorneys and petitioned the trust committee for my removal, claiming emotional bias and vindictiveness. But Harold Wilson presented the evidence of my management decisions, all of which had been made with proper documentation and clear justification. The committee unanimously voted to keep me as trustee, noting that despite the personal betrayal, I had maintained professionalism in executing my fiduciary duties. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Tiffany had indeed left Brandon after our conversation. When she discovered she wasn't the only special woman in his life, and that his financial situation wasn't what he had portrayed, she quickly moved on. According to rumors, she was now dating a professional athlete with more genuine wealth. Brandon's financial reality had changed dramatically. With access only to his quarterly distributions, most of which went to maintain his existing debts, he had been forced to adjust his lifestyle. The trust committee had approved his continued residence in a smaller Morrison family property, but the penthouse, luxury cars, and vacation homes were no longer at his disposal. The most profound change, according to Harold, who still updated me occasionally, was that Brandon had taken a position with a financial services firm, an actual job with responsibilities and expectations. At 34, he was experiencing the accountability of earning his own way for the first time. As for me, managing the Morrison Trust remained a significant responsibility, but one I approached with integrity and careful consideration. I ensured Brandon received his mandated distributions on schedule, never allowing our personal history to interfere with my professional obligations. I also worked with the trust committee to establish a substantial educational scholarship fund, which would help deserving students from disadvantaged backgrounds attend business school. A cause I believed Stanley would have supported. Surprisingly, my relationship with some members of the Morrison family had improved. Elizabeth, Brandon's mother, had initially been coldly furious about my role as trustee. But after reviewing the evidence of Brandon's behavior and witnessing my ethical management of the trust, she had grudgingly acknowledged that her father-in-law's choice might have been sound. We weren't friends, but there was a newfound respect between us. Brandon's sister Natalie had been even more surprising. After the initial shock wore off, she had invited me to lunch to understand what really happened. Our conversation had been candid and unexpectedly warm. Grandpa Stanley always had good judgment about people, she told me. I should have paid more attention when he took such an interest in you. My personal healing had been a longer journey. I had joined a support group for people dealing with infidelity and financial betrayal in their marriages. The shared stories helped me realize I wasn't alone in my experience and gave me perspective on my own recovery. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the complex emotions, the anger, hurt, and lingering questions about what had been real in our relationship. Over time, I came to understand that Stanley had seen something in me that even I hadn't fully recognized: resilience, integrity, and the strength to make difficult decisions when necessary. His trust in me had ultimately forced me to trust myself, to recognize my own value beyond my marriage to his grandson. I had started dating again, cautiously. Coffee meetings and occasional dinners with men introduced through trusted friends or professional connections. Nothing serious yet, but I was open to possibilities in a way I hadn't been immediately after the divorce. One connection in particular, with a professor of economics named Marcus, had progressed to regular dates. Unlike Brandon, Marcus was impressed by my career and financial knowledge rather than threatened by it. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, a novelty that still sometimes surprised me. As I sat in my new apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, reviewing some trust documents while enjoying coffee on my small but pleasant balcony, I reflected on the strange path my life had taken. The pain of Brandon's betrayal would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. In losing what I thought I wanted, I had found something more valuable: confidence in my own judgment and the freedom to build a life on my own terms. My phone chimed with a message from Marcus. "Still on for the Art Institute this afternoon?" I smiled as I typed my reply. Life wasn't perfect, but it was authentically mine now. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is how you find what you truly deserve. Brandon had taught me that wealth without integrity is ultimately empty. Stanley had shown me that true strength comes from using whatever power you have responsibly. And I had finally learned that my value was never tied to someone else's perception of me. It had been within me all along, waiting to be recognized. I hope my story resonates with anyone who has ever felt underestimated or betrayed. Have you ever discovered your own strength in the aftermath of someone else's betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my journey has inspired you in any way, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is simply yourself.